G'day and a big welcome to K3tan, well known in Australia, and I'm guessing by now well known quite around the world at this stage for the formidable work he's been doing with nodes and supporting people in setting up their own nodes. Welcome aboard, K3tan.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you here. K3tan, let's dive straight in. I would love to get, for those who don't know you, who don't know your background, can you give me a bit of the backstory? And I'd love to go back a little bit further than the average. I'd actually love to go back to kind of uh, where you grew up, schooling, even uni, what you studied, and then we can kind of get into the Bitcoin story. But let's get that kind of context first, if you don't mind.
Sure. So my name's K3tan. I was born and raised in Sydney. I've lived here pretty much my whole life. And I went to school, well, actually, I went to school I went to a Catholic school for both primary and secondary education. And then I went to university at UNSW and I did accounting and finance, a Bachelor of Commerce. So that was with Stephan Livera, who is a prominent podcaster in the space as well. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I started. And then I kind of, from there, I started working at Ernst & Young, which is a big four accounting firm. And, ever since then, I went down the rabbit hole of Bitcoin, and then made some changes by starting up a company called Ministry of Nodes, which is an educational effort to help people understand Bitcoin better. And so, yeah, that's kind of a brief overview of me.
Great stuff, thank you. So are you going, by the way, because I know it's being held at University of New South Wales, are you going to the Sydney Bitcoin, are you speaking there?
Yes, I will be speaking at the Bitcoin Alive conference that is on the 15th of April at the UNSW Roundhouse, my old stomping ground.
Absolutely, it is. That's fantastic. Great stuff. What goes around comes around. Tell me a little bit about as I like to do, I like to dig down a little bit. You've said you went to Catholic school. Tell me a little bit about your household, the family you grew up in, and the values of your family. And if your values today divert very much from those original values, have they changed? Have they morphed? Have they evolved over the years?
Look, I think so. My dad also went to a Catholic school. He's from Fiji, and so he wanted that sort of discipline, I guess, that comes out of a Catholic school for me as well. And so, it's very by the book. I wouldn't say that I'm too by the book. So some values have diverged in that regard. Um, but yeah, I think a Catholic education obviously brings certain disciplines that come out, and I like going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. Well, it teaches you really to just have a think about some of the things that have been taught to you and sort of rewire some of that. So I think whilst I still have I guess, similar views and values, family values, those sorts of things that, are very much similar to with my parents. There are divergent views. My father, he's also an accountant as well. He is a no coiner. He doesn't think that Bitcoin is something to even sniff at. And so, we clash heads a fair bit there. So, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose.
So, give us the brief dive into your rabbit hole. What happened there?
Okay, so Stephan Livera actually is the one who sort of started my orange pilling journey. Um, we went to university together and we just studied what was in the textbooks. And Stefan said to me, "Look, mate, I think central banking, it's a scam. It's a racket. The government's a racket. They're not there to sort of look after you. They're there to look after their own interests." And so he was a libertarian by, I think he was like age 17 or 19. He was a libertarian. Um, And I was like, well, mate, what's your proposed solution? Like, we've got central banking. That's what we're studying. That's what we, that's what we do. This is how the world functions. What's your alternative? And it was silence because he didn't have a response.
Mm.
Then a few years later, we were still friends. But he just sent me the white paper. Okay. And I was like, okay, is this a proposed solution? He said, yeah, look, this could potentially be what, we could potentially rely upon. That goes against every sort of central banking fundamental. And I'm like, okay, let's take a look into it. And I fell hard. I just kept reading and reading and reading. I think nonstop 2 weeks. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. Like, I was fascinated. And back then, the education space wasn't probably as large as it was, or that it is now. And so you
What
had to
year,
sort of,
what years are we talking roughly?
we're talking 2013, early
Oh, wow.
2013.
Yeah. Well,
Um, and the education wasn't that great then. And what you would really be looking at is Reddit posts and deciphering, okay, what is conspiracy theory and what is actual, truth. And yeah, I just kept reading opinions upon comments, upon all sorts of things. And yeah, I was like, by the end of it, I was almost like, that scene in The Matrix where he wakes up and he goes, "I know kung fu." That's kind of how I felt after the 2 weeks of just gathering as much information as I possibly could. So that's kind of my genesis story, if you'd like to call it that. Yeah, Stefan sort of and we've been, within the Bitcoin space together for a fair bit, and we still talk to each other pretty much every day. So it's kind of like yeah, we sort of talk through issues and talk through Bitcoin related matters. And yeah, and we've been doing it since 2013, literally.
amazing. What an introduction, and how lovely to have someone to talk about it from the beginning. So, I certainly felt, even with the amount of education that's around now, and I only started getting interested maybe a year and a half ago, so I'm very new to the space. I have still felt like, despite all the smart people in this space, all the people I trust, despite the white paper, despite my understanding of Austrian economics, despite everything, I can still have moments of thinking, am I a conspiracy theorist? Have you managed to just put that to rest altogether? Are you just in a, like, do you ever look around and go, am I just in a bubble? Are we all just, intellectually messing with each other? Says she as politely as she can.
Yes, I do feel sometimes that I'm in clown world. Like, that's literally how I would describe it.
Mm.
But look, I don't think it's as bad as it was in 2013, 14, 15. When you said some of the things that you did in 13, 14, 15, you were well off the rails
I
by then.
bet.
Um, and then when you say something anti-government now, it's like, okay, fair enough. I get your own. I kind of get where you're coming from. Whereas in 2015, if you said something like that, it would just be like, mate, what are you talking about, man? Like, so I think things have improved on that front. But at the same time, yes, 95% of people would still be, just ignoring, just want to stick their head in the sand, don't want to open up any further, don't want to ruffle any feathers, don't want to pick up a book or a podcast. And yeah, it is very, very unfortunate. But I do have hope that it will change. The more that the more that comes to light,
Yeah.
I'm hopeful that it will change, and it will change for the better.
Tell me about Ministry of Nodes. There's a lot of education now in this space, and there's a lot of education platforms. What is it that Ministry of Nodes specializes in, and how does it kind of function? Who uses it most?
Yeah, so look, Ministry of Nodes is an educational sort of it's my own sort of like giving back to the community, just to help people understand. Okay, look, I was there when I was just like, trying to figure this stuff out. I wish I had someone to help me and guide me through this, and that's where I come from, right? So that's what it was, that person that you could go to and say, hey, could you just explain this to me, or could you just show me how this works? Podcasts are great. I think people spend a lot of hours on podcasts, but podcasts tell the story. I would rather show you the story. This is why I kind of do a lot of screen sharing and those sorts of things on YouTube, um, to be able to answer some of these questions that people have around, holding their own Bitcoin keys and running their own Bitcoin node and privacy best practices. So I show you these things throughout my video series. And the other thing that I offer is one-on-one consulting sessions, and that is open to everyone, whether you're new or you're old, or you're, whatever you background that you've got. You can just book in a session on my calendar, and I'll be there, and you can ask me any Bitcoin related matters, or if you're just having troubles with the series that's being presented to you, you can ask your questions there based on any of the material that I've put out over the years. Yeah, you're more than welcome to just sort of jump in, say hello, and ask any of your questions that you want answered. And I just, it's a pay whatever you think it's worth type of model. So it's at this point, it's more like value for value. If you found value in that, then yeah, you're more than welcome to tip me. If not, that's fine as well. That's cool.
How generous are the people in this space, really? We're all so driven by this kind of passion, just passion to change the world.
Yeah, it is. I feel that as well. It's very mission driven. That there is a specific mission that we're on, and that is to somewhat sort out the money, so that we get better incentives, aligned incentives, and it just it just leads to generosity, really.
So there are two trains of thoughts going through my mind. I'm going to tackle one, then the other. The first is around nodes. The second is about fixing the money. Let's talk nodes first. I always live in hope that people are listening who this podcast literally may be, for whatever reason, the very first time they've ever heard anything about Bitcoin. So what's a node? Let's start there.
Okay, so a Bitcoin node allows you to do two things, and it allows you to be to be a participant on the network in a self-sovereign way. So what we mean by that is, one, if you run a Bitcoin node, you can't be censored or you can't be blocked by anyone, right? So if you want to put through a transaction, it goes. Okay, there's no one blocking that transaction. So that is one reason that you'd be wanting to run a Bitcoin node. The other more primary reason is to actually verify that you have Bitcoin, and not some fake sort of Bitcoin. Think of it like a fake Bitcoin detector, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we give it an analogy around gold, if I was to give you, so say for example, you mowed my lawns, and I gave you a brown paper bag with some rocks in it, which I called gold. And I said to you, here, this is for payment. Now, are you automatically just going to accept at face value that it's gold? What you'd probably be doing is opening up the brown bag, inspecting it, maybe weighing it, those sorts of things, right? You'd be doing that. But in the digital realm, the only thing that allows you to verify that you actually have Bitcoin and not some other asset, or just numbers on a screen, is by running a Bitcoin node. It is your Bitcoin node that tells you that you have this balance, and it is the Bitcoin node that allows you to broadcast from moving one side of the ledger Bitcoin to another. And so those are the two key, I would say, aspects of what this Bitcoin node does. Without them, then you are enslaved. I wouldn't use the word enslaved, but you are you are basically permissioned by somebody else. Whereas if you run a Bitcoin node, you are, I would say, a first-class Bitcoin citizen.
Excellent. So for someone who's new to this, that may sound off-putting, because part of our pitch, if you like, as the global marketing team that we are on behalf of Bitcoin, is that it's trustless, that it can't be hacked, it's transparent, as well as all the other things like it's fungible and divisible and it's
Yep.
all the other things we know it to be and scarce. This almost sounds like more concerning. Oh, really? I thought that it was all of these things, and now you're telling me I've got to verify. So, how do I know that what I've got on my ledger? So, I've gone out, I bought $20 worth of Bitcoin or $100 worth of Bitcoin, and then I did the right thing, and I did my research, and I went out and I got a cold card, cold wallet, whatever, private keys, hiding it somewhere in my home, memorized 12, 24 words, and now you're telling me I've got to run a node?
Look, I would strongly recommend that you do. It is part of why I guess my business exists. So it's not just holding your own keys. Yes, that gives you sovereignty. That 100% gives you sovereignty. At least someone can't sort of steal it. But at the same time, you are trusting another third party to verify and transact on the blockchain that they have called Bitcoin. So, for example, what if one day Ledger, when you stick your Ledger into your computer and they've got a software there, what if they put you on a chain that has 25 million coins and you think that you're transacting one Bitcoin and you're moving it, but it's in a ledger that has 25 million coins that they've defined as Bitcoin, right? How do you know? Well, you are trusting Ledger. That's not to say that Ledger's not a trustworthy company. They're obviously acting in the best interests of Bitcoiners. Otherwise, their entire sort of model collapses. But at the same time, we go that one step further and go, okay, am I transacting on the ledger that I want to transact in? Is it some other ledger or blockchain that doesn't prescribe to the rules that I have subscribed to? So in that regard, yeah, I would strongly recommend that the more nodes that we have on the network, the more trustless it becomes. And that is how we build trustlessness on the network, by running more Bitcoin nodes. So I would actively encourage listeners to not only hold their own keys, which is part of the self-sovereignty, but also run their own Bitcoin nodes. And the YouTube material that I put out there, alongside other projects as well, help to make that process a lot easier. So there's other projects in the space called Mynode, Raspberry Blitz, Ronin Dojo, Umbrel, Start9 Labs. These guys are doing phenomenal work in being able to bring Bitcoin nodes to the masses. And I think the fact that there's 5 of them in this early space, I think that's kind of a testament to, the importance of running a Bitcoin node. We've got so many options there. So yeah, we should be doing it.
So I've got two questions out of that as the just everyday Bitcoiner that I am, who hasn't gone down this track because I'm not particularly IT savvy. So the first question is, what would be I don't want to know all the steps at this stage because it would, my brain will explode very, very quickly.
Sure.
So just give me, if I had to know the first step, what would it be?
I guess the first step would be just to research Bitcoin nodes. I think that is probably the best place to start. And potentially those projects that I have, alluded to, and my YouTube content, have a watch, have a research. That's your first step, is to just understand, okay, what exactly am I meant to be doing here? What is the process? It really comes down to, I think your first step would be to research the importance of it, and then research how to do it. And then the third step would be actually following through and doing it yourself. That's
Got
the
it.
more harder part.
Okay, makes sense. All right. Second question then on that front is, uh, so if I've got my coins on a whatever cold wallet device,
Yep.
how do I test them via
Your
The
own Bitcoin node? Yeah. So there's lots of software that you can actually import your hardware wallet into. But my favorite one at the moment is Sparrow Wallet. Okay.
I love.
And Sparrow Wallet is a fantastic desktop Bitcoin wallet that you can download for Windows, Mac, and Linux. Um, and you can import the public keys of your hardware wallet into Sparrow Wallet, and Sparrow Wallet allows you to select which node you want to pick. So they've got a couple of public ones that other people run, which is similar to what Ledger would do for you. Um, and then they've got you can run it again, and then you can select, okay, well, I wanted to actually fetch the information from my Bitcoin node, and you can select it. And so once you've selected that and imported your own keys in, that is probably where you've leveled up and you've said, yeah, okay, I actually own this amount of coins out of the 21 million that are on issue. Fantastic. No one can take that away from me. And if I want to transact, no one can stop me.
Great. All right. So let's go down the second track then, which is around self-sovereignty, which is what we're transitioning into there anyway. So, and self-sovereignty, of course, is very appealing, I think, to a lot of people because self-sustaining is also has been an incredibly attractive proposition for a lot of people for a long time. Self-sovereignty is, I think, it's been assumed for many years. And now I think a lot of people are questioning it. And I'm wondering if that's why a lot of people have come into the space, as I did over the last couple of years. Uh, so my questions around that start here. Uh, do you have a view on ways in which you consider that we are not currently sovereign?
From a financial perspective, 100%. You only have to look at what the central bank is doing, and literally everyone asks. So the central bank says, jump, and the rest of the population says how high, and those how highs are in the form of interest rates. And so we are all, I guess, impacted by central banking decisions, whether that be to raise interest rates or printing of money in particular, unlimited supplies of money, and how dangerous that is. And we're seeing the consequences of that play out with rising costs and all those sorts of things. So did anyone vote for that? I don't think so. Was that agreed to? No. So how could you call yourself sort of self-sovereign in that regard? Whereas you've got another alternative, which is Bitcoin, which is you can subscribe to the philosophy there and say, okay, look, this thing has certain rules. One of these rules is that we have a strict 21 million cap supply. And some people might like that. Some people might go, you know what? I think that that's probably a wise thing as compared to the central banking mantra of print, 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 print. So, it's up to you which monetary policy you'd like to subscribe to. But I know where I kind of stand with that. And I think, no, people need to be a little bit more self-sovereign when it comes to their money. And it's not just central banking, it's also banks as well. If you have a look at some of the things that are going on in the world where people are getting deplatformed and debanked, and transactions are being blocked for whatever reason or put on hold for like 48 hours. These things happen all the time. With a click of a button, if somebody says to the bank, hey, could you shut down this account, they'll do it. And I don't think that that's, I would like to see more monetary justice is what I'd like to see. And I think Bitcoin presents that opportunity.
So I would say most Bitcoiners these days feel very strongly about that. Yeah, I would think that would be a driving force for, I don't know what percentage of the Bitcoin community, but a substantial number of us. Other people don't necessarily feel that strongly about it. I think, well, not I think, what we saw over the last few years is people who called, those of us who called out freedom as being an important issue, we got called freedomers.
Yep.
Uh, they're
Cookers, I believe, was the technical term
cookers.
that they
We're
used.
all cookers. I think I don't know if that's particularly an Australian term, but for sure, how many times have I been called that? And you could argue that we'd be called cookers for having these thoughts about central bank and inflation and so forth. I've been called mad for being concerned about it. Most people think inflation is caused by supply issues, they or climate change issues, and therefore our food is more expensive. Um, People are not concerned about freedom. They see what's just happened over the last couple of years, including the Canadian truckers and the freezing of the bank accounts. So, not just the restriction of borders, but also of accounts, bank accounts. They see that as, and this is like literally a conversation I've had in the last week with a mate of mine who's hugely knowledgeable about a lot of stuff. He's very across politics and economics and has been for many, many years. And his words, it was a one off. And I feel like as long as the vast majority of the population, and you said it was something like 95%, still feel that and aren't going to see, therefore, the value proposition in Bitcoin for the West. Let's just leave aside developing countries as a different issue.
Yeah, look, what I would respond to that is, I guess, you know, there are ways to, I guess, what we could say is it hasn't happened to them yet. Okay. I think things have to get a lot worse before they get better. Okay. We live in, a very privileged country, I guess, here in Australia. Um, there's still lots of, good things about the place. And I think things have to get far worse for people to go, you know what, it's really, really tough now. And that tipping point hasn't really happened yet. But if we keep kicking this can down the road, I suspect that there will be more people who get captured by well, I just can't keep up.
Mm.
And I'm seeing it already. More and more people are struggling. I see it all the time. And so the more and more that happens, and we hit a critical mass, I think, and admittedly though, Australian culture is to just whine and do nothing about it. It's there's
Mhm.
always just I want to whine, and I think people need to move past the whining stage and move to, okay, what is a practical solution that we can actually do to help our situation. And I think many Australians, and many people around the world will come to the conclusion that maybe, you know what, maybe Bitcoin has some legs to it, and that we want to stop this abuse of monetary deplatforming and monetary policy once and for all, and we will go down this path instead. Maybe not today, maybe not 5 years, maybe not 10 years, but surely, I would hope that by the time my kids grow up, they never walk into a bank ever again. Just by purely incentives. I think the price of Bitcoin should hopefully uh, tell people, hey, I probably should have got some of that, or I should probably work for some of that. And eventually, people will start to wake up. I think it's maybe a decade or generational type thing, rather than one specific event that will, I guess, set and forget type thing. People have very, very short memories. I don't know if anyone even talks about the trucker situation anymore.
Mm.
And so people just, they do their thing, they work, and that's the end of it. It's until, something happens to them personally, that's when they go, okay, I'm going to need to start looking for some other solutions here. And maybe that other solution is taking up a second job or taking up some additional things. But at some point, people are just going to snap and they're going to find something else. And I think Bitcoin will be there to help those people who have been either censored or debanked or losing value. But again, I can't predict the future. So take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Indeed, indeed. Because, so many different variables come into the equation at any given point in time, and possibly the uptake will need to be overseas before it really hits Australia. We tend to be a little bit behind on those things before, we need to be led by someone else first. What are your, so you're seeing a kind of intergenerational thing. So I want to talk about the short term and the long term. In the short term, I've got Bitcoin, right? However much I think I've got. And so does it actually do anything for me in the short term other than number go up?
It allows you to transact in a more free way. So when the CBDCs eventually come in, you may be restricted by your carbon footprint. You may be restricted by your location as to where your phone is when you do that transaction. There are all sorts of restrictions that can be placed on money, on digital money. And I think Bitcoin might present an option for you in those events. So you're probably preparing not for today, not for tomorrow, maybe just that time where, damn, I really needed those airline tickets because, it's my father's funeral and I need to go see them. But I'm out of carbon credit limits, so I can't get to my own father's funeral or whatever, right? Until it affects you, that's when you start to rationalize the use of free money. And not free as in free beer, freedom is what we're talking here. So I think that's kind of where a situation may arise where you will be probably going, you know what, I'm okay with spending some of this coin to ensure that I fulfill my needs and wants, rather than being told, hey, you can't have this, you can't do this, you can't buy this type of meat or this type of airline ticket, or these restrictions, these micromanaging using money is a very, very, very dangerous slippery slope to go down. And I think Bitcoin represents an opportunity to opt out.
Great. I'm going to ask the obvious question. Do you foresee, I think most of us in the Bitcoin community foresee a time where the government really gets, they realize this thing is entirely out of their control and they go all out to freeze at least the on and off ramps and so forth, that some people foresee as getting potentially ugly. Do you have any ideas around that, what that might look like?
Look, I don't like to, give wild projections or dwell on it as well.
Yeah.
I think the more productive thing is to just opt out. If you think that there is an issue, there probably is. You should go with that gut feeling and look for alternative solutions. I am so happy that we have an alternative solution.
Yeah.
I think that is just it basically is a God's gift almost. And so I think the more people that want to use that, more people who want to use that ecosystem, I'm happy to help you to understand how it works, and so that you are your own sovereign person as well, and that you can stand with 2 feet and in with dignity. That's what I'd like to see more of, and that's what I'm going to keep pushing, and that's what I'm going to keep focusing on. I'm not going to dwell on what what could be. Over the next decade. But I do see a trend of decentralization in food, decentralization in health, decentralization in money, decentralization in all sorts of, schooling and education. I don't think the government is going to be the single source of truth anymore. And so I think people should get with the times.
And certainly Mark Moss's theories, where he looks at cycles of centralization versus decentralization, of collectivism versus individualism, and he would absolutely say that we are moving towards a time of greater decentralization.
And I'm all for it. We know what the issues are with the centralization. Like, centralization is great. It's fast, it's quick, it's efficient. But is it morally right? Those are the questions that need to be sort of answered. And yeah, decentralization leads to better outcomes. If you just look at the internet, how phenomenal is that? And the reason that it's phenomenal is because it's decentralized. Yeah, there's a lot of things that are being decentralized now. I named a few of those topics, and they are so much more powerful. Even now with communications, we're decentralizing Twitter in the form of Nostr. And so, we're having decentralized communications, decentralized food, and all these topics that are now just going, okay, well, we had a central point. We understand that it was great. It was phenomenal, but there were some issues. There were some big, big issues, and we need to solve those.
Explain decentralized food.
I guess what I'm seeing is instead of going to these big warehouse farms, we've got smaller farms who are servicing a smaller area, producing local foods that are
Yeah, right.
using pesticides and things that are a little bit kinder and better for health. So that's what I'm seeing. So supporting your local grower, manufacturer, supplier, rather than this big farm that just does a wholesale for 20 million people. That's kind of, I think, the decentralization aspect of it.
See, this is where I just think the left and right have far more in common than they realize. I think we're both interested in lower time preferences. I think we're both interested in more sustainable. And when I say both, I don't know that I actually fit myself in any particular category. I think I've been shoved in a category by people who, who might disagree with me on some issues. But I think this idea of a more sustainable, more independent, a more um, uh,
Competitive.
freedom of time, um, freedom to look after your community and to care about your neighbours and to make a difference in the world and to do volunteer work in whatever capacity. Um, freedom and then you've got this whole sustainability, self sustaining. We've just had a friend staying here overnight, and she's going to be building her own straw bale house. My husband and I have both explored, well, my husband particularly, but I did way back when, mud brick housing and so forth. I find all of that so appealing, and buying from the local farmers market. And I just think that's stuff that we all have in common. And I wonder if that's actually something that we could be. I'm going off on a tangent now from our conversation, and there is something I actually want to ask you about. But I do feel like that there's this vision that we share.
I think so too. I don't know if we've got a word for it, but maybe it's decentralization.
Right. But I think if we tied in words like self-sustaining and self-sovereignty, those might appeal to a broader group who see decentralization maybe as scary. Anyway, that's a bit of a kind of thing I've got going on at the moment about how we frame up our orange pilling efforts. Leaving that aside, you mentioned to me in a piece of correspondence back and forth about the Promethean simile. And you just thought, didn't you, about the God, you just said about it feels like it's God's gift.
Ah, right.
And the idea of, so did you bring up about Prometheus? I was shocked
No,
it was you.
no.
Oh, okay. Must have been someone else I was in contact with. So let's talk about Satoshi anyway, whilst we're here. We talk about God's gift. Do you see similes? Do you see parallels in you come from a Catholic education. And you talked about your Genesis story, I noticed. Tell me about, do you see any similarities in terms of the beginning of the world all over again?
Look, I'm not really one to sort of go down that path. I just kind of go down the path of what can a human do to improve their situation. I'm more practical in that regard. I look. where it came from, the genesis story of Bitcoin. Yes, it's very unique. It's very, very interesting, but I don't try to draw any parallels to that with, God or something like that. It's just not my cup of tea. My cup of tea is, okay, we've got this thing now. It's a brand new technology. How can we exploit it to our advantage? How can we sort of use this as a tool to enable some of our goals, which are freedom, decentralization, having that time to sort of understand your neighbors better, those sorts of things I'm interested in, rather than taking some sort of look. I use the word God's gift quite loosely there, but yeah, I try not to focus on where this thing came from. It's the fact is it is here. And let's use it. Let's really start to build a circular economy with it, because I think it's because the reason that I say that it's a God's gift is because I can't see any other alternatives.
Yeah.
And so if this is our one, and we're hanging by a thread here, and if that is our one shot, let's give it a red hot crack.
Indeed. And as you say, red hot, just so that you know, the Promethean thing was that he was the gift of fire to human beings. He was
Very
and to the
interesting.
degree that that transformed evolution and transformed humanity, that's the kind of simile that's drawn out there, or the metaphor that's drawn out. You just mentioned circular economies, and that's something that I'm really interested in, because freedoms can be restricted in other ways. They can close the borders. They can, as you just mentioned with CBDC, they can freeze our bank accounts. They can direct our spending with CBDCs. I can be trapped in Melbourne very quickly. How do circular economies work, and how does that create a level of freedom that can, from which we can grow? How could that be a transitional step?
Yeah, look, I think peer-to-peer economies is basically not interacting with a third party, removing ourselves from interacting with a third party that now we used to trust, but not so much anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So what that means is, from a surveillance perspective, it makes it much more difficult to get a broad state of the union, so to speak, of where the funds are flowing, what's going on. And that means that they can't make these sometimes god awful decisions. And so when we when we transact peer to peer, you do something for me, and in return I pay you Bitcoin. I think that sort of sits outside of the purview of the state. Any sort of tracking, surveilling that's going on, it becomes harder to do. It's not impossible, but it makes it more difficult to get an accurate depiction of what's going on with the entire economy, and therefore decisions decisions can't be reliably made, and sometimes most of these decisions unfortunately just benefit a certain few, and I'm not about that. And so I think having a peer-to-peer economy allows you to trade without restriction. It allows you to have this form of money that can go beyond borders. And if you need a specific task done, it can be done without sort of a paper trail, so to speak, being left behind. Now, on the flip side, yes, of course, that can be used for illicit purposes, but at the same time, it can be used for so much more. Even just food and groceries and things that people just don't want you to have in the future. It might be they might have restrictions in place and those sorts of things. It's to just route around these sorts of rules that get put in place. So I think having a peer-to-peer economy is something that we should sort of strive towards. I would love nothing more than when people pay me in sats. It's the best feeling ever. When people reward you, with a limited supply of money. That is huge as compared to, okay, here's $50, go, do what you want with it. Likelihood you'll spend it because it's being inflated away anyway, and it can be printed, into infinity. So I think having that peer-to-peer economy values our money, and it also values the other person who you want to do a fantastic job for them, because your money's not being devalued, you're not being stretched, and you get a better service and you get a better money. I can't think of a better trade.
Indeed. I, I'll drink to that. Um, that sounds great. What's your sort of feeling like we're moving towards some sort of wind up point, but what's your vision for the future? Why are you doing this? Why are you putting so much time into this? What do you want to create for the world? What's your hope, your dream?
I guess for me, it's just to live in a better world. We're not going to all, agree on everything. We're not going to sit, hold hands, and sing "Kumbaya" along a campfire. That's just not realistic. But I do think that there are some specific things that can be solved through money, and some of those we've touched on: being debanked, being censored, being tracked, being surveilled. Um, Printing money. I think these issues can be solved. And the flow on effects of that, I think, is a better and more free society. That's what I'd like to see. That's my vision for the world. Whether it comes into fruition, I hope so, because the alternatives are looking extremely bleak. So that's that's why I do it. That's why I put a lot of time and effort into this.
Good for you. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Have you got any final words? Is there something that we haven't touched on, something that you would really like to kind of put out there, either reinforce or bring up that we either haven't touched on or haven't gone deep enough in?
Look, I think if you just keep, my mantra is to hold your own keys, run your own Bitcoin node, and practice, privacy best practices. I think these are three things that an individual can do to up their game. And I would just continue doing that. And if you need to find resources, my website is ministryofnodes.com.au. I'm also available on Twitter at _ K3tan. And if you'd like to book in a consulting session, you're more than welcome to, and you can find that on my website.
Fantastic. We'll include all of those connections and contacts in the show notes. K3tan, thank you so much for taking this time and giving us an insight into some stuff that I don't normally get into on this show. And I really need to understand more for myself, but also bring to my little community a lot more. So I really, really appreciate this time and your input. Thank you so much. All the best. Take care.
Thank you.